When a billionaire dies, blood turns to venom. Her cousins fought over the Manhattan penthouses and the Cayman accounts. They laughed when she claimed the collapsed, worthless silver mine in the Colorado mountains. They called her a sentimental fool. 6 months later, nobody was laughing when the federal agents surrounded the mountain. The mahogany-paneled conference room at Gable, Harrison and Associates felt less like a legal office and more like a slaughterhouse waiting for the meat to arrive. The air conditioner hummed a low, freezing note, but the sweat on Preston Croft's brow was palpable. Across the heavy oak table sat his sister, Vivian, her manicured fingers tapping a restless, staccato rhythm against her crocodile skin handbag. In the corner, sitting in a leather chair that felt far too large for her, was Harper. She wasn't supposed to be there. For the last 15 years, Harper had been the family ghost, the estranged daughter of the youngest Croft son, who had died in a tragic, mysterious boating accident when she was only a child. While Preston and Vivian were groomed in Swiss boarding schools and Ivy League business programs to inherit the massive Croft empire, Harper had been scraping by as an architectural archivist in Chicago. She wore a simple wool coat that smelled faintly of public transit and rain, a stark contrast to the bespoke Italian suits and designer perfumes suffocating the room. At the head of the table sat Harrison Gable himself, a 70-year-old attorney whose face was as deeply lined as the legal ledgers he managed. He cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We are here for the execution of the final testament of Nathaniel Croft," Gable began, his voice gravelly and devoid of emotion. Nathaniel Croft had been a ruthless industrialist. He built his fortune pulling copper and silver from the earth before transitioning into a real estate and tech holding empire that spanned 3 continents. He was a man who viewed his family not as loved ones, but as a portfolio of investments, and he was famously disappointed in all of them. Gable read through the standard legal jargon, distributing the minor inheritances. A few $100,000 here for former staff, some charitable donations to the university that bore his name. Then, Gable paused. He looked up, his eyes resting heavily on the 3 grandchildren. Nathaniel was an eccentric man, Gable said carefully. His instructions for the bulk of his estate, valued at approximately $1.4 billion, are highly unusual. There will be no equal split. There will be a draft. Preston leaned forward, his chair squeaking. "A draft? Like a sports draft?" "Precisely," Gable nodded, sliding a thick, leather-bound folio to the center of the table. Nathaniel divided his primary assets into 3 distinct portfolios. Portfolio A contains the Manhattan commercial properties and the Cayman Island hedge funds. Portfolio B consists of the Silicon Valley tech shares and the London residential estates. Gable took a breath, looking down at the paper. And Portfolio sees a single deed. The Blind Owl Shaft, a defunct 19th century silver mine in Telluride, Colorado, along with $50,000 in cash. Vivian let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "A collapsed mine? Is this a joke? Who would pick a pile of toxic dirt over $1 billion in real estate?" "The order of selection," Gable continued, ignoring the outburst, "was determined by Nathaniel prior to his passing. He left a sealed envelope for this very moment." Gable produced a heavy envelope stamped with red wax, breaking the seal with a silver letter opener. He extracted a single sheet of paper. "The first selection goes to Harper Croft." The room went dead silent. Preston's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. Vivian's jaw dropped, her perfectly glossed lips parting in shock. "That is absurd." Preston slammed his fist on the table. "She's not even a real Croft. My grandfather hadn't spoken to her in a decade. You're telling me she gets first pick of the Empire? Those are the terms, Gable said coldly. Harper, you have the floor. You may select portfolio A, B, or C. Harper stared at the table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew what Preston and Vivian were thinking. They thought she was going to take the Manhattan real estate and ruin them. But Harper's mind was flashing back to a memory from 3 weeks ago. She had received a package in the mail. No return address, just a battered copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, a book her grandfather used to read to her father. Inside, underlined in faded red ink, was a single sentence. The true treasure is never found in the light of day, but buried beneath the ruins of what others have discarded. Tucked in the spine of the book was a single, rusted iron key stamped with an owl. Nathaniel didn't do sentiment. He did strategy. If he put a worthless mine alongside billion-dollar portfolios, it wasn't a joke. It was a test, or a map. Harper slowly stood up. She looked at Preston, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of rage and terror, and then at Vivian, who looked ready to faint. "I choose portfolio C," Harper said. Her voice was quiet, but it echoed in the silence of the room. "I want the blind owl mine." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Preston let out a bark of incredulous laughter. "Are you serious?" Preston sneered, a massive grin of relief breaking across his face. "You have the choice of a global real estate empire, and you're taking a toxic, caved-in pit in the middle of nowhere." "Harrison, put it in writing before she changes her mind," Vivian snapped, her composure instantly returning as she realized the Cayman accounts were now hers for the taking. She must be out of her mind, just like her father. Harper didn't flinch. She walked over to Gable, who was staring at her with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. "Are you certain, Miss Croft?" Gable asked softly. "Once the ink dries, this cannot be undone. The mine has been abandoned since 1934. The EPA has nearly condemned the surrounding land twice. It is a liability, not an asset." "I'm certain," Harper said, taking the pen. She signed her name with a steady hand. As she walked out of the conference room, clutching the manila envelope containing the dusty deed to the blind owl, she could hear her cousins popping a bottle of champagne in the adjoining office. They were mocking her, calling her a sentimental, stupid girl who had just thrown away $1 billion. But as Harper slipped her hand into her coat pocket, her fingers wrapping around the cold, heavy iron of the owl-stamped key, she knew one thing for certain. Nathaniel Croft never lost a game, and he had just made her his final player. Telluride, Colorado, was a town split in two. There was the vibrant, wealthy valley floor, packed with ski resorts, luxury SUVs, and tourists drinking oat milk lattes. Then there was the high country, the jagged, unforgiving San Juan Mountains, where the air was thin. The roads were treacherous, and the ghosts of dead miners still seemed to linger in the mist. The Blind Owl shaft was located at 12,000 feet, accessible only by a crumbling dirt switchback road that terrified Harper as her rented Jeep struggled over the ruts. Sitting in the passenger seat was Elias Boone. Elias was a local structural engineer and amateur historian, a man whose face was weathered like old leather, and who smelled faintly of pine and diesel. Harper had hired him for $1,000 a day to get her inside the mine safely. "I gotta tell you, Miss Croft, this is a fool's errand," Elias grunted, clinging to the dashboard as the Jeep hit a massive pothole. The Blind Owl wasn't even a good mine when it was operational. It produced low-grade silver for about 6 years before the main vein dried up. Your grandfather bought the land in the 80s for pennies. Never did a damn thing with it. The timber supports inside are likely rotten to the core. I just need to see it, Elias, Harper said, keeping her eyes on the treacherous road. I need to know why he left it to me. He left it to you because rich folks like to hoard dirt, Elias muttered. They finally reached the site. It was a bleak, desolate plateau surrounded by towering pines. The entrance to the Blind Owl was a jagged black moor cut into the side of a granite cliff, boarded up with thick, weathered timber and wrapped in heavy chains. A faded, bullet-riddled metal sign read, "Warning, unstable structure, no trespassing." Harper killed the engine. The silence of the mountain was absolute, broken only by the wind howling through the valley. She stepped out into the freezing air, zipping her jacket tight. Elias grabbed a pair of heavy bolt cutters from the back of the jeep and walked up to the entrance. With a loud, metallic snap, he broke the rusted padlock on the chains. He pulled the heavy timbers aside, revealing a tunnel that plunged into absolute darkness. "All right," Elias said, tossing Harper a heavy-duty headlamp and a hard hat. "We stay close. You step exactly where I step. If I say we turn back immediately. There are vertical drop shafts in these old mines that go down 300 feet. You fall in one, you don't stop falling until you starve." Harper strapped the helmet on, her hands shaking slightly. "Lead the way." They stepped into the mountain. The temperature plummeted instantly, the air turning damp and smelling heavily of metallic dust and wet earth. Their headlamps cut through the gloom, illuminating thick wooden support beams that sagged under the immense weight of the rock above. Water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling, echoing in the cavernous space. As they ventured deeper, Harper's mind raced. What was she looking for? A hidden safe? A stash of gold bullion? Her grandfather had been a genius at hiding his wealth to avoid taxation, but burying it in a dangerous, collapsing mountain seemed too archaic, even for him. "Watch your step," Elias warned, pointing his light at the floor. The old cart tracks were still embedded in the stone, rusted and twisted. They walked for nearly half a mile into the belly of the mountain. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a larger excavation chamber. Elias swept his light across the room and frowned. "That's weird," he muttered. "What?" Harper asked, stepping up beside him. "Look at the walls," Elias said, stepping closer to the rock face. The rest of the tunnel was blasted with black powder. 19th century style, ragged edges. But this chamber... He ran his gloved hand over the stone. "These drill marks are modern, core drills. Sometime in the last 20 years. Someone expanded this room. Why would you expand a dry silver mine?" Harper's pulse quickened. She pulled her flashlight from her belt and began sweeping the room. Her beam of light hit the far wall and stopped. "Elias," she breathed. At the back of the cavern, seamlessly integrated into the natural granite, was a massive wall of poured industrial concrete. And set directly in the center of the concrete was a heavy, circular steel door. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault, complete with a heavy mechanical turning wheel and a brass keyhole. Stamped right in the center of the steel was the faint etching of an owl. Elias let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. That's a Mosler vault door, mid-20th century. Weighs about 4 tons. What the hell is a bank vault doing buried inside a dead silver mountain?" Harper reached into her pocket. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out the heavy iron key her grandfather had sent her. She walked up to the steel door, the silence in the cavern suddenly feeling suffocating. She inserted the key into the brass lock. It slid in perfectly. Harper grabbed the heavy steel wheel with both hands. She gritted her teeth, throwing her weight into it. With a deafening metallic screech that echoed through the mine, the locking mechanisms inside the heavy door disengaged. Elias rushed forward, helping her pull the massive steel slab open. The heavy door swung outward, revealing a dark, square room carved deep into the bedrock. Harper stepped inside, her headlamp piercing the darkness. She expected to see pallets of gold bars, stacks of bearer bonds, or perhaps priceless stolen art. Her grandfather was capable of anything, but as the light swept across the room, her stomach dropped into an icy abyss. The vault was completely empty. No gold, no money, nothing. Just bare concrete walls and a thick layer of dust. "I don't understand," Harper whispered, her voice cracking. "It's empty. Why would he lead me here?" Elias stepped into the vault behind her, his light illuminating the floor. "Miss Croft, look." In the center of the room, sitting on a small wooden stool, was a single leather-bound ledger. But that wasn't what had caught Elias's attention. Leading from the entrance of the vault directly to the stool were a set of fresh footprints in the dust. "Someone's been here," Elias said quietly, his hand instinctively dropping to the heavy flashlight on his belt. "Recently, within the last few days." Harper slowly walked over to the stool and picked up the ledger. She flipped it open. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was a list of dates, locations, and names: Geneva, Monaco, Dubai. The names attached to the locations were politicians, federal judges, and international businessmen. Next to each name were staggering amounts of money. Millions. Tens of millions. And at the very bottom of the last page, written in fresh, bold black ink, was a note. It wasn't her grandfather's handwriting. "Harper, I knew you were smart enough to find the vault, but you were too slow. Enjoy the dirt. Preston." Harper stared at the note, the blood draining from her face. Preston. Her cousin hadn't just mocked her at the reading of the will. He had played her. He knew about the mine. He knew about the vault. He had put on a show in the conference room to make sure she took the bait, keeping her away from the actual liquid assets while he came up here and cleared out whatever leverage or wealth Nathaniel had hidden away. Suddenly, a loud, echoing crack reverberated through the mine. Elias spun around, shining his light toward the vault door. "What the hell was that?" Another crack, this time closer, followed by the terrifying deep rumble of shifting rock. "The supports!" Elias yelled, grabbing Harper by the arm. "Someone's blowing the timber supports in the main tunnel. We have to move, now." Harper shoved the ledger into her coat, her mind spinning with a sudden, horrifying realization. Preston didn't just want the treasure. He wanted the only person who knew it existed, buried alive beneath 12,000 feet of granite. The ground heaved beneath Harper's boots as a deafening roar tore through the blind owl shaft. A cloud of ancient, choking dust rushed into the vault, blinding them instantly. Elias grabbed her shoulder, his grip like a vice, and yanked her violently toward the tunnel exit. "Keep your head down and run," Elias bellowed over the chaotic symphony of cracking timber and screaming rock. He set the charges on a delay at the primary junction. If that ceiling comes down, it takes the whole mountain with it. Harper shoved the leather ledger deep into her coat, zipping it to her chin as she sprinted blindly into the dark. The beams of their headlamps cut erratically through the thick, swirling dust. Above them, a massive wooden support beam snapped like a dry twig, sending a shower of jagged granite crashing down inches behind Harper's heels. The concussion of the falling rock threw her forward, scraping her knees against the rusted iron tracks, but Elias hauled her up before she could stop moving. "There's an old ventilation shaft about 50 yards ahead," Elias shouted, his breath ragged. "It's a vertical climb, but the main tunnel is already gone." Behind them, the darkness swallowed the vault entirely as thousands of tons of rock collapsed, sealing the chamber forever. They reached a narrow, vertical, jagged opening in the ceiling, barely wide enough for a human body. Ancient iron rungs were hammered directly into the stone. Elias shoved Harper upward. She climbed with a desperate, frantic energy, her hands bleeding against the rusted metal. The mountain continued to groan and shift beneath them, a sleeping giant trying to shake off parasites. After agonizing minutes of vertical climbing, Harper felt the biting sting of cold mountain air. She breached the surface, collapsing into a snowdrift on the high ridge, gasping for breath as Elias pulled himself up behind her. They lay there in the freezing silence of the Telluride night, watching a massive plume of dust rise from the collapsed main entrance below. Preston had timed it perfectly. He had intended to bury her forever. Hours later, huddled in the safety of Elias's dimly lit cabin at the base of the mountain, Harper finally pulled the ledger from her coat. She set it on the scarred wooden table, wiping a smear of blood from its cover. Her hands were still trembling, but the terror had evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing anger. Elias poured 2 glasses of cheap bourbon and set one in front of her. "Your cousin is a dead man, Miss Croft. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling the federal marshal in Denver. Attempted murder. I don't care how rich he is." "No," Harper said quietly, staring at the ledger. "If we call the authorities now, Preston's lawyers will bury us. We have no proof he set the charges. He was probably on a private jet to Manhattan before the dust even settled. He wanted me to die down there. But more importantly, he wanted this." She opened the book. The pages were filled with meticulous, handwritten notes. But as Harper studied the numbers and the accounts, a strange realization washed over her. She recognized the formatting. She was an archivist. She spent her life categorizing historical data, recognizing patterns, and validating authentic documents. "This isn't a ledger of grandfather's hidden wealth," Harper whispered, her eyes widening as she traced the ink. "Look at the dates. Look at the routing numbers. These aren't deposits. They're payments. Bribes. Hush money." Elias frowned, leaning over the table. "To who?" "Everyone," Harper breathed. "Politicians, competitors, environmental regulators. And look at the bank routing codes. These are deeply illegal, untraceable shadow accounts. And right here, on the inside cover, is a stamp from Kroll Inc." Elias raised an eyebrow. "The private corporate investigation firm?" "Exactly," Harper nodded, her mind racing, piecing Nathaniel's final puzzle together. Kroll audited Nathaniel's empire 10 years ago. They found all of this. To avoid federal prison, grandfather must have moved all the illicit funds, dissolved the accounts, and hidden the evidence. This ledger is a confession. It's a map of every illegal thing Nathaniel Croft ever did to build his fortune. Elias took a slow sip of bourbon. "So Preston stole a book of crimes, thinking it was a map to hidden millions. Preston thinks this ledger gives him the account numbers to access grandfather's secret offshore wealth," Harper said, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips. "He's going to take this book to the Cayman Islands. He's going to try to access these accounts, completely unaware that they are red-flagged federal honey traps, Grandfather didn't leave this ledger in the vault to enrich whoever found it. He left it there as a poison pill. He knew Preston was greedy enough to steal it. But wait, Elias interrupted, rubbing his bearded chin. If the ledger is a fake-out, where is the actual inheritance? The will said Portfolio C was worth a fortune. Was the whole thing just a lie? A trap to take down Preston? Harper stopped. She looked out the cabin window, staring into the dark peaks of the San Juan Mountains. The true treasure is never found in the light of day, but buried beneath the ruins of what others have discarded. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. She thought back to the vault, the massive 4-ton Mosler steel door. Elias had said it weighed 4 tons, but when she had turned the wheel, it hadn't felt like steel. It was too soft. The screech it made against the hinges was dull, heavy, and lacked the sharp metallic resonance of industrial iron. And the silver mine itself, it was completely dry. Why buy a dry silver mine? Because you needed an abandoned, unseen place to hide something massive. Harper gasped, her hands slamming flat against the wooden table. "Elias," Harper said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "What is the current market price for a single ounce of gold?" "About $2,000, Elias answered, confused. "Why?" "A Mosler vault door weighs roughly 8,000 pounds, Harper said, pulling out a notepad and scribbling furious calculations. If someone were to melt down stolen gold bullion, cast it in the exact mold of a bank vault door, and paint it with industrial steel enamel, it would hide right in plain sight. Elias's jaw dropped. He stared at her, completely stunned. Grandfather didn't hide the gold inside the vault, Harper laughed, tears of disbelief welling in her eyes. The gold is the vault. 8,000 pounds of solid 24-carat gold. That's nearly $250 million. And Preston just blew up the mountain, burying it under thousands of tons of rock to protect it for me. 6 months later, the Manhattan penthouse of Preston Croft was a monument to unearned victory. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a room filled with politicians, socialites, and Wall Street executives. Preston stood on the balcony overlooking Central Park, a glass of vintage champagne in his hand, feeling like a god. Since Harper's tragic disappearance in the Colorado wilderness, Preston had successfully consolidated the entire Croft empire. He had taken Portfolio A and B, leaving his sister Vivian completely sidelined. He had also been secretly traveling to Geneva and the Cayman Islands, trying to activate the routing numbers from the ledger he had stolen from the blind owl. The accounts had been frozen, but Preston was quietly working with corrupt bankers to pry the funds loose. He was invincible, until the elevator doors of his penthouse chimed open, and the music suddenly stopped. Preston turned around, his smug smile faltering. Walking into his living room, flanked by 6 armed agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and an auditor from the SEC, was Harper. She wore a sharp, tailored navy suit, looking nothing like the quiet archivist he had left to die in the dirt. "Harper," Preston choked out, dropping his champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor. You're dead." "Not quite, Preston," Harper said, her voice echoing clearly through the silent, shocked room. "The federal marshals pulled me out of Telluride months ago. We've been very quietly waiting for you to make your move." A stern-faced FBI agent stepped forward, flashing a badge. "Preston Croft, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, attempted bribery, and the attempted murder of Harper Croft." Preston's face flushed pale, panic seizing his chest. "This is insane. You have no proof. I am a billionaire. I own this city. You own nothing, Harper corrected smoothly, stepping closer. When you tried to access the accounts in that ledger, you triggered a tripwire Kroll Inc., set up a decade ago with the Department of Justice. You handed the feds the exact map of Nathaniel's illegal bribery network, and you put your own name on the withdrawal slips. The SEC has already seized Portfolio A and B. You're bankrupt, Preston. Preston lunged forward in a desperate, animalistic rage. But two federal agents tackled him to the marble floor, locking his wrists in heavy steel cuffs. He screamed and thrashed as they dragged him toward the elevator. Harper watched him go, feeling no pity, only the cold satisfaction of justice. Nathaniel Croft was a ruthless monster, but he was a monster who understood exactly what his grandson was. He had used his own corrupt legacy as a weapon to destroy the worst of his bloodline. 2 weeks later, the crisp Colorado wind whipped across the high plateau of the San Juan Mountains. Harper stood at the newly cleared entrance of the Blind Owl shaft. Behind her, a massive team of federal engineering contractors and heavy excavation machinery hummed with activity. Elias walked up beside her, holding a hard hat. He smiled, looking at the massive flatbed truck parked near the cliff edge. Secured to the bed of the truck, wrapped in heavy chains and guarded by private security, was a massive, circular door. The industrial grey paint had been chemically stripped away, revealing the blinding, spectacular gleam of solid, unadulterated gold beneath the Colorado sun. $256 million, verified by the Treasury this morning, Elias said, handing her a clipboard. And since it was legally deeded to you as a structural fixture of the property under Portfolio C, the IRS can't touch it. Your grandfather was a terrifying genius. Yes, he was, Harper said, signing the transport manifest. She looked up at the jagged peak of the mountain. She had come here as a forgotten ghost, a punchline to a cruel family joke. But she was leaving as the sole master of the Croft Empire. She didn't just inherit her grandfather's wealth. She had inherited his cunning. "Where to now, boss?" Elias asked, signaling the transport drivers to roll out. Harper smiled, slipping the heavy iron key with the owl crest into her pocket. "Somewhere warm, Elias. The ghost is finally retiring. What would you do if your own family left you to die for a fortune?" Harper proved that the greatest treasures aren't just handed to you. They are earned through brilliance, resilience, and outsmarting the wolves at your door. If you were captivated by this incredible story of betrayal, hidden gold, and ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.